What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a great day today. This is Alex from the Fresh Fantasy Podcast, and this is the fifth episode of season 4. Today, we are answering some of the early burning fantasy questions, talking about things like the best running backs to target, this year's late round tight end, and the top 12 fantasy player in ADP with the most red flags, and so much more. Joining me today to break this all down is one of the most special guests I've ever had. He is a renaissance man, from doing 100-mile bike rides to coordinating Spartan races, appearing on Sirius XM, and being a prolific podcaster and writer. He does it all. He is now a full-time fantasy analyst for one of the biggest fantasy companies on the planet with over 38,000 followers. He is the man, the myth, the Andrew Erickson. Welcome back to season 4.
You know, that intro I would give 9.5 out of 10. The only reason it's not 10 out of 10 is because I got no TikTok love in the intro there. Even though I know my TikTok game is not on your level, Alex, I do think I have made great strides since filming on my very horrible Motorola phone where you could barely see whether I was on camera or not. So I've made major upgrades there. So looking to take TikTok to the next level. So by the next time we're on this show, hopefully I can get some TikTok love in the introduction. But so happy to be here. So happy to chop it up, talk some fantasy football here. In April, we got the draft coming up. So things have cooled off a little bit. Yeah, most of the pro days are now in the bag. It's kind of just like rumor season. It's like X team wants to trade X quarterback. And it's just every single day we're going to get a new rumor. Be like, well, maybe the Texans don't want a quarterback at all anymore at the top of the draft. So yeah, a lot of noise right now. But when it comes to fantasy, there is no noise. It's just facts. And we're going to lay them out here today.
That is the best way to put it. I think that, like you said, it is mostly just going to be rumors upon rumors upon rumors. We'll get our occasional sick throw that Will Levis is going to make and probably boost his draft spot by 4 or 5 spots. There's probably someone that's going to be smoking a bowl that's going to get dropped down at least 10 spots in draft capital on day one. Like we're going to get it all, but mostly it is just going to be rumors upon rumors, whether it's Mac Jones or Lamar Jackson, Aaron Rodgers, if that ever happens in this universe, who knows? But today we are here to talk about fantasy, and we will start with that quarterback position. And today, just real quick before we get into everything, we're going to go a little bit down the list, a little all over the place today. We're going to go through quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, some interesting questions, and just some things that fantasy people need to know before we start. But let's start at the quarterback position. We're going to work all the way around. But right now, Andrew, who is your favorite quarterback to be targeting in early fantasy football drafts? Is there anyone in particular that's catching your eye that you think has massive potential for this year?
It's a guy that was a top scorer at the position last year, and nobody seems to care. It's Geno Smith for the Seattle Seahawks. It's like we all just pretend like last year didn't happen at all when if you look at the quarterbacks that scored more points than him in points per game, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, and Lamar Jackson. That's it. Those are the only guys that outscored Geno Smith points per game. Geno Smith is quarterback 17 in ADP. Like, did we just forget about what he did last year? I get like entering into last year, nobody believed in Geno. Like, neither did I. I was like, don't touch Seattle with a 10-foot pole. And that was totally wrong because he totally surprised me. But now we have a year in the bank, and is everyone just going to pretend, oh, well, it's not real? Like, it didn't matter. It reminds me so much of Ryan Tannehill when he was written off basically after flaming out in Miami, went to the Titans, was like basically posting a passer rating as high as Patrick Mahomes, and every year nobody wanted to draft him because they're like, oh, it's fake. Like, he's never going to keep it up. But why can't Geno keep it up? What have we seen from him in this offense except be super accurate? And if you look at a lot of these mock drafts, what are they adding at the 20th pick? Another wide receiver. Yep. Like, if he has Lockett, Metcalf, and then one of these first-round wide receivers, I don't see how Geno Smith isn't going to finish at least at worst as a top 15 quarterback, which means you're getting him right now at your floor. So I absolutely love Geno Smith right now.
Yeah, he had one game last year where he finished outside the top 20 quarterbacks for the week. So he wasn't necessarily lighting it up week in and week out, but he was consistent every single week. You could rely on him. He's a value. I think another guy that's a value that is going at his absolute floor, considering he will be playing at some point this season, is Lamar Jackson. I know the rumors are going on, but I think that honestly, like, in terms of like landing spot, the Ravens might be like the worst team that he could probably play on in terms of weapons. Like, Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman, like that's like, I don't think there's many teams that he could go to that have like worse weapons or pass catchers overall than they do. And in his full seasons as a starter, he's finished as the QB1, QB6, 7, and 5. And now he's going as the QB8. I mean, don't forget, this is still the same guy that had the greatest QB fantasy season of all time, which would have been 3 fantasy points per game more than Mahomes averaged this year, who was the number 1 quarterback. Again, I don't see a world, unless this turns into Le'Veon Bell 2.0, where Lamar Jackson does not end up playing football somewhere at some point this year. And I think that I am going to be taking and buying the dip. I'd love to see him in a place like Atlanta, we'd have Drake London and Kyle Pitts to unlock better weapons than Baltimore overall, but I am all in on Lamar. Do you think I'm getting a little ahead of myself? Or is there a real chance that he doesn't play football this year?
It's tough. It's really tough to tell right now with how he feels. I mean, he's still young, and it's different from like Le'Veon Bell because Le'Veon Bell played running back, so he's a quarterback. So it's like if he takes a year off, I don't know if he's gonna like have a lack of interest. I don't know. It just seemed like the NFL has just like never really been in on Lamar Jackson. Even going back to his draft. Like the Ravens still drafted Hayden Hurst instead of Lamar Jackson first. Like everybody just forgets that. It's like, oh, well, the Ravens believe that Lamar is like so much more than every other team, as the Patriots who passed on him twice and drafted Sony Michel. They can make up for it, dude. The Patriots can get Lamar Jackson. They need to do what's right, get Lamar. Let's hope that it works out.
I completely agree. But again, I just don't see a world where he doesn't end up playing football this year. I can't think of
it's a lot of money to give up. It's a lot of money to give up.
But not only that, but like a player that's under 25 years old, that's playing at the most important position in the league, and other teams are going to be rolling out like, potentially someone like, Sam Howell at a starting quarterback, or Desmond Ridder. Like, no disrespect to those guys, but like when there's someone like Lamar Jackson waiting, I don't see how he doesn't end up with it. But I will digress. Let's move on to a quick running back question. Is there any running back in particular you find yourself taking in early best ball leagues right now, or someone that is just going way undervalued you think that is going to rocket up in ADP over the summer?
I think this player is going to rise in ADP because the market's going to realize, like, what are we missing here? It's Nick Chubb. So he's RB9 in best ball ADP. I have him in my top 5 running backs because why not? He rushes for 5 yards per carry every single season. He rushed for over 1,500 yards last year, and nobody even cares. It's like, oh, yeah, like he rushed for, 1,500 yards. Kareem Hunt's gone. He could get up all the pass game work. Deshaun Watson should take this offense to the next level. RB9. He was RB4 for the first 12 weeks of last year. So I'm trying to figure out like how he's going to be worse, despite the fact that he's never really been a bell cow back in terms of getting all the usage, but he's been making up for it because he's been super efficient. And if there's ever going to be a year where he sees more volume than he's ever had before, especially as a receiver, it would be the year where they don't have Kareem Hunt. I don't know if people are worried that they're going to bring Kareem Hunt back on like some deal, but it's like we saw what they did with him last year. They did not use him. So even if they bring him back, it's like, okay, well, they're not going to use him. So I think Nick Chubb, super safe where you can get him now, and he could score 20 touchdowns playing an offense that takes another step forward. So I just think that there's super safe floor with Nick Chubb and an even higher ceiling that I don't think is being realized at his RB9 price tag.
I think my only concern is just that like last year, I think he had 19 and a half touches per game, and Josh Jacobs led the league at 23 and a half. So like, I don't think that there's like a massive ceiling for improvement in terms of touches, but I think granted that probably some of those touches end up being pass game touches rather than just strictly running the ball like it was previous season with some extra touchdown upside, obviously. But I'm not sure, Nick Chubb, like, I mean, talent wise, he obviously does. If he has that top 3 finish somewhere in him, especially with like the touches that he's getting, and he still hasn't been able to do it. But again, I'm not hating on Nick Chubb. He's as consistent as it gets in fantasy football. You will never lose your league drafting him, regardless of the upside that he brings. For me, it's a guy that's going a lot lower, and that's Antonio Gibson, who I think is the most underrated running back probably in all of fantasy football right now. It just makes zero sense to me what is going on. He's going as the running back 44 in underdog drafts right now. J.D. McKissick has been released, who had a 39% snap share last year. He was playing 40% really of the snaps every game that he was healthy. And that's all the juicy pass game work that we want as fantasy managers. And Antonio Gibson should rack up all of that. Brian Robinson, like, I get he's there, But like, he's not a pass catcher. He had 0 games with 3 catches this past year. He had only 1 game with 3 targets. And Antonio Gibson is a better pass catcher. He's more athletic. And they hired Eric Bieniemy at offensive coordinator, who's should have had a head coaching job by now, which I think is going to help elevate their offense even more. And I just don't see a world where Antonio Gibson finishes below this when he's finished as the running back 12, 13, and 27 in his 3 seasons. So, Andrew, what am I missing?
No, I love Antonio Gibson. I bought him in Dynasty. I think he's a screaming buy because, even if he has to sit behind Brian Robinson on the Commanders, there's a chance that he gets traded. He could get cut. He's a free agent after this year. And I just think buying and chasing after his archetype of player, 25-year-old running back who has been an RB1 already twice in his NFL career, who can catch passes, has ideal size, a 3-down skill set. It's like RB44. It's like, who lists off all those great reasons? It's like, nah, I don't want to draft him. But it's like, take advantage of his cheap price, because the only reason he's cheap is because, he's like not the starter, like Brian Robinson is there. But Eric Bieniemy is a new offensive play caller coming in. Like, they could go 3 weeks of Brian Robinson running into the back of his offensive line and be like, you know what? We're sick of this. Like, I'm using Antonio Gibson. I'm using the more explosive pass catcher. And the Commanders, how good is that offense going to be? How good is that team going to be? If they're down in games, who's playing? Is Brian Robinson in the game? No. It's probably going to be Antonio Gibson. So, yeah, I agree so much with Gibson.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. But he's going to be one of those guys that rises over the summer once people start to kind of get a little bit of a move on the fact that he's going to still be seeing a lot of touches, no JD McKissick, whatever. But what about the wide receiver position? Is there someone similar to a Nick Chubb or Antonio Gibson, someone that you're falling in love with early right now?
Yeah, I'm pretty like in line with a lot of the wide receivers that are going in ADP. But the one player, again, just tying back to what I saw with Geno Smith last year, and I'm just kind of like buying the Seattle offense and buying the Seahawks in general. You look at the NFC, it's weak conference. Like, besides Jalen Hurts, I mean, we have people ranking Justin Fields as like the number 1 quarterback in the NFC overall. I don't necessarily agree with that from a real life perspective, but it just kind of shows you what level of talent is in the NFC. So looking at Seattle, I want pieces of this offense who hit on their draft last year. And that starts with DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is wide receiver 14. Like, we've seen this guy be a top 5 wide receiver before. We know what he can do. And I get that, Tyler Lockett's there. They split targets 50-50. But we look at the second half of the season and just overall, Metcalf, 18th in target share at almost 26%, 12th in air yard share, 37%. Only he and Justin Jefferson, weeks 1 through 17, tied for the most red zone targets among all wide receivers. And Metcalf just did not convert enough of those red zone targets into touchdowns. Like, this is why I was on the Courtland Sutton bandwagon last year, was looking at red zone usage. And it's like, hey, I think this guy is a dark horse to lead the NFL in red zone targets, because that's what we saw Russell Wilson fuel. But maybe it wasn't Russell Wilson. Maybe it was just having a guy like DK Metcalf, someone that absorbs red zone targets. And just last year, he just didn't score as many touchdowns based on the volume he was getting, especially in the red zone. So I think Metcalf has a chance, especially with being high on Geno. If Geno throws for 30 touchdowns again, I think DK Metcalf is going to have double-digit touchdowns. And when you score double-digit touchdowns as a receiver, it's really, really hard to not be inside the top 10, if not top 5. So I like Metcalf outside the top 12 wide receivers.
Yeah, I think beyond that, I think another guy that's going to see a ton of targets that is being completely overlooked at this point is Deontay Johnson. Yeah. I mean, like, have we ever in fantasy land seen a wide receiver going at 39th or worse overall after being 6th in the NFL in targets last year? Like there was 5 players with more targets than him, and he's going outside the top 35 receivers right now. He was also like 9th in routes run, 14th in air yards. He had a 27% target share, 31% red zone target share. But the problem is, like, he just set the NFL record for most targets without a touchdown all time. But can I tell you a funny stat that I saw the other day on Twitter, courtesy of Jacob Gibbs? Deontay Johnson had a 44% end zone target share for the Steelers last year. He had 44% of their targets inside the end zone and still did not score a touchdown while being 6th in the NFL in targets. Kenny Pickett should be better. This offense should be better. I just don't see a world at this point where Deontay Johnson does not smash his ADP. He's going at his floor. He's probably going to be top 10 in targets once again. Don't forget, he's still a year ago. The reception perception data I don't think has come out yet for him. He was 6th in the NFL in beating man coverage, and he was the number 1 wide receiver versus zone. Like, what is there not to love with Deontay Johnson at this point? Is there any other reason you think that, once again, I could be missing of why he's going so low? Or should the people be buying him and Tyler Lockett in back-to-back rounds and drafts right now?
I think that you want to buy Deontay. I mean, we see this happens all the time with Deontay Johnson.
Yep.
1 year he has a lot of drops and people hate him and write him off, and the next year he doesn't drop as many passes. It's like people are fading him for all the wrong reasons. Like, he had so many drops, fade him the next year. He never scored any touchdowns, fade him the next year. When the consistent thing every single year is Deontay Johnson is, no matter who the quarterback is, no matter. It doesn't, if the guy's arm is falling off, it's a rookie quarterback, whatever, like, he's just going out and getting 150 targets every year.
It's the most automatic thing in fantasy football. Fantasy managers can take advantage every single day of the week and twice on Fridays. But what about, speaking of underrated, what about the tight end position? Like, every year there seems to be a super late round tight end that goes off and goes nuclear. Who do you think that tight end is this year?
Yeah, I don't love this question, honestly. Like, the late round tight end, I feel like I've just swung and missed so many different times with so many different guys, because it's a tough thing to peg every year, especially with injuries really playing a large role. But for me, the guy that I'm kind of gravitating towards now is Chigakonkwo for the Tennessee Titans. I think that you're looking at a Titans roster that, look, they didn't re-sign Jeff Swaim or Austin Hooper, so he's the de facto number 1 tight end in the offense. Now there are question marks about, like, okay, how often is offense going to throw? Like, we don't really know. But I do know one thing is that whenever they do throw the ball and Chigakonkwo gets the ball in his hands, like, he's going to be efficient. Like, that's what he showed last year. He's leader in yards per route run among tight ends as a rookie. So I think that with really only Treylon Burks as like his main target competition right now, I think Chigakonkwo, if he stays cheap, I think that he's one of my favorite guys to take a flyer on late.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the guy for me is Greg Dulcich, who's still going into tight end 15 right now. And I think there's a lot of things that would hint at him moving up. And again, tight end 15 is the key thing here. And going back to previous seasons in the NFL, there've only 3 rookie tight ends ever that had a 15+% target share and an average depth of target of at least 9 yards. Those players are Vernon Davis, Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, and Greg Dulcich became the 4th this past year. Also, while going outside the top tight ends, he was the 7th most targeted tight end in the NFL as a rookie. He ran the 5th highest route percentage, and route percentage is tight end routes compared to the snaps that their offense is on the field, meaning that he dominated the tight end share when he was out there. There weren't other tight ends taking away his routes, and when he was running routes, he's being targeted at a 19% rate as a rookie, which is great for a receiver, let alone a tight end. And that is something that should only improve going into year 2. The Broncos haven't brought in any other significant competition for targets. I know Tim Patrick will be back, but he's not going to command anything different. And that tight end room looks very, very similar to what it did last year. I'm very, very high on Greg Dulcich. Do you think that Greg Dulcich is someone that people should be believing in, or do you think that with how this offense looks, with it being more wide receiver heavy, it could take away when they have people like your guy, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy there?
I just think it's a matter of, is Greg Dulcich Sean Payton's guy?
Yep.
Like,
that's a good point.
That's like the biggest question mark with him. And I found that trying to chase like any tight end that gets steamed up with basically like no guaranteed role just doesn't work out. And not to say that Greg Dulcich can't be that guy, but if he becomes so much more expensive, then it's just like, I'm out. I'll just take another late round tight end, because right now he still is kind of that late round darling because of what he did last year, but it's a whole new coaching staff. It's a whole new offense potentially. So it's like if Sean Payton comes in and is like, hey, I like Albert O, like I'm going to use him instead. Like we were talking about Albert O in this conversation last year, and obviously he flamed out. So yes, I think at tight end 50, I think Greg Dulcich is a fair price. But I am hesitant just based on the coaching staff.
Yep, that's a good point. And hopefully Sean Payton loves him as much as I do right now, because that would be very beneficial for our best ball drafts. What about the other side of things? Talked about some guys that we like. What about some guys that we don't like? Let's start with running back. Is there any running backs right now that you are staying away from at all costs in your fantasy football drafts?
Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, like just these older running backs that just had massive fall offs in terms of their rushing efficiency last year. Like these are the signs that you look for with some of these running backs that were once locked and loaded first round picks. Look, are they all going to flame out entirely? Maybe not, but I just don't want to be caught holding the bag because, especially with these running backs, even if they start out the season well, you can't trade them because everybody knows what's going to happen. Everyone knows they're going to fall off. Like we know when Zeke was scoring all those touchdowns last year, it's like you don't have any value with him. It's like you just have to keep starting him and just hope he keeps scoring touchdowns because that's how these older running backs produce. It's just they're touchdown dependent. So just too many question marks. And if anything, if I will take one, it just matters who is the cheapest of the three running backs or of these veteran running backs. Basically, if there's a older running back or a veteran running back that the market has like deemed like I'm totally out on this guy, kind of like a Josh Jacobs was last year, that's the guy I'll take. Whoever is the cheapest among the running backs that I least like, because there are paths where veteran running backs do get volume and score touchdowns, but I'm not paying any sort of premium for running backs coming off horrible efficiency years with question marks of wear and tear.
Do you think that I'd be a little bit crazy to be having a younger running back like Dameon Pierce, as my pick? I mean, the fourth round draft capital. Again, I love Dameon Pierce. We stand on him in this podcast all last. We talked about him together on an episode ourselves. But for Dameon Pierce, I mean, he averaged like almost 50% more fantasy points per games in games with where he had 20 plus touches compared to in games that he had less than 20 plus touches. He averaged less than 8 PPR points a game. I mean, this offense is going to look a lot different than it did last year. I mean, there's going to be a quarterback change. There's also Devin Singletary there, who I don't think is a massive threat, but I think he's enough of a threat. But the biggest thing for Dameon Pierce was volume. And he produced when he saw that 20 plus touches, like I mentioned, but when he didn't, he just seemed to fall short. And you go back to the draft capital thing, that it was awesome when he was the only really guy back there besides Rex Burkhead to give touches, but we're not seeing the same scenario. So do you think that I should be undervalued? Do you think that I'm overlooking Dameon Pierce a little bit?
I don't think so. I think that your analysis is pretty spot on. Look, if you just blindly like faded day 3 running backs that are pegged as starters heading into the next year, you're going to come out with a profit. Like, does it happen every single time? No. It's like, could you have kept fading James Robinson, so many years and him continue to burn you? But eventually you were right. Like eventually, like he flamed out and it didn't matter. Now he got hurt, but it's still just a process play. It's like when you bet on these day 3 running backs to hold jobs as starters, you're going to lose more than you win. So I can't guarantee it. Obviously, every case is different and specific to teams and players, but look, he's still a 4th round pick at the end of the day, and that doesn't go away.
Yep. And then the other part of it is that the total numbers look great for him, like his evaded tackles, his total yards created as a whole. But on a per touch basis, he was an average running back. Like he wasn't inside the top 20 in either of those metrics. He was outside the top 20. And yes, in counting stats, he looked great because he had a high number of evaded tackles. That was because he had a super high number of touches relative to the running back position. But on a per touch basis, he really wasn't that special. Again, I wish I was wrong. I would love to see Dameon Pierce season once again, where he sees, 500 carries next year. It's not the reality that we live in. But what about the wide receiver position? Is there any wide receiver in particular? Maybe it's another boomer wide receiver that you're just staying away from in every fantasy draft?
Yeah, it's DeAndre Hopkins. I just think that he's really
Why?
expensive at wide receiver 17. I think it's expensive. We don't know is he going to be on the Cardinals? Do we know what team he's going to be on? I just think it's a lot to pay for a guy that we don't know what team he's going to be on. And if he's on the Cardinals again, who's his quarterback going to be? David Blau at wide receiver 17? Like, it's kind of expensive. So not really interested in that price.
Yeah, that is a really big yikes. I have a similar player that I would like to talk about in terms of my next question, and that was going to be what round 1 player you think has the most red flags right now, and mine's Cooper Kupp. It seems like Matthew Stafford's coming back, but he's coming off an injury. Cooper Kupp is coming off an injury. He is one of 2 30-year-old plus wide receiver ones right now in the top 12. Are the Rams still contending? Are they going to shut him down at the end of the year to kind of save the money like they did last year when he could have came back? To me, and going inside the first round right now, there are just too many questions to be believing in Cooper Kupp, especially when I think he's going as the wide receiver 3 right now in ADP. Again, he's been nothing but productive, but I think there's just so many questions when you look at the first 12 fantasy picks that I just don't know I can get behind him. Is there anyone in particular outside of Cooper Kupp, or is it Cooper Kupp for you that is the biggest risk in the first 12 picks in a fantasy draft right now?
Yeah, no, I think Cooper Cup's probably the right answer, especially where like he goes like third overall, after Jefferson and Chase. Again, I'm very afraid to think this could be like a Michael Thomas scenario where he has this just like ungodly year, gets hurt, and then we just keep chasing that same year over and over again. It just never happens ever again, despite quarterback changes, like offensive changes, doesn't even matter. It's just say, hey, well, let's keep pushing Cooper Kupp up the draft rankings. So the only other guy for me would be Austin Eckler, running back. I think that he kind of started the season as like the RB2, basically behind Christian McCaffrey. But I mean, everything in his profile is screaming like, okay, like this guy's going to regress eventually. He scored like 40 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He's just like on an absolute touchdown streak. And eventually the touchdowns are going to come down. They're looking to try to trade him. Is he going to get traded? Like, that's obviously going to impact his fantasy value if he goes to a different team, because what he wants, he's been vocal about this. Like, he doesn't want to touch the ball every single time. Like, he's fine giving up goal line touches to a different running back. So that in itself is going to just hurt his fantasy upside, especially as a guy going in the first round in half PPR. So you're not even necessarily getting all the full points for how much he's used in the passing game. Doesn't mean he's going to be like a total bust, but as a top 5 pick where he was usually going at the beginning of draft season before the trade rumors kind of sprinkled in, Eckler is someone that I'm just kind of like not trying to draft right now.
Yeah, I think off of that with Eckler, like you like, have we ever heard of a running back that's like, please give me less touches every single year? Like, granted, he scored another 20 touchdowns this past year, but like, I just can't think of a running.
Keep doing that though. Like, that's the thing. Is like,
where Ezekiel Elliott, like, as much as people love to hate him, would happily take 30 touches a game right now, and Austin Eckler is getting 20, and he's like, please, like, spare my body. Like, again, Austin Eckler, smart business move by him. I'm not crapping on him. Like, from a fantasy perspective, I don't love it, but again, he is a hero to the fantasy community. But we don't hear that from running backs often, so I wouldn't be surprised if the touches go down, especially when, as we're recording this, like, he's saying that, the worst case scenario is that I come back and have to play for the team that made me the running back 1 in fantasy this year. So we don't know where he's going to end up. We just don't know with Austin Eckler. I think that's a really good point. But speaking of questions, like, is there any other player right now that is like the hardest to rank player for you at this point in the offseason? Like, for me, it's Christian Watson. You know what I mean? Like, you could look at the Christian Watson angle so many different ways, where I could say I'm staying away from him. New quarterback situation. They're probably bringing in more weapons. Like, he produced really well on a small sample size last year as a rookie, but is he really that guy? Where on the other side, he was like the number 1 player in points per snap against man coverage last year. Jordan Love could be really good for him for peppering him with targets. What if they don't bring someone in? Like, who's that player for you that is the hardest to rank right now in your early rankings?
Well, for me, it's more towards the top, and it's really more injury related, and it's Breece Hall. Because if Breece Hall was healthy, he would probably be like my number 1 overall pick, or like very close to the top there, besides Jefferson and Chase. Like, he would be right up, because I'd be like, all right, like, what am I missing here? Like, because he was already a top 8 running back last year at the time that we saw him. Look, when we're talking about drafts next year, I really think it's going to be, okay, who are you taking number 1 overall, Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson? Like, that's going to be the debate. If it's not, because obviously everything's super wide receiver heavy now, so it's going to go back to running back, because we just are so recency bias based about like, oh, well, running backs weren't that good, so we're going to go receivers. Like, oh, well, Bijan and Breece Hall were so good last year, so we got to draft running backs first. So that would not surprise me. But those are the 2 guys I think will be at the top of drafts next year, and that's why Breece Hall, like, that's the only reason he's being kind of ranked in like round 2, because everyone's like, oh, well, I don't know, he's coming off the ACL, but look, with super freaks like Breece Hall. And I don't like to necessarily compare him to players, because coming off ACL, there obviously is concern. And that's why I don't have him ranked as a, top 5 pick, because you should have some concerns. But at the same time, we've seen older players and players, I think, that profile similarly to a Breece Hall, like an Adrian Peterson, like a Jamal Charles, come off ACL injuries and just rip the league to shreds. And I just think Breece Hall, especially how young he is, and especially all the reports saying how clean his ACL tear was, like, I'm just drafting him basically no matter what. And I think that by the time we see like some training camp video of him like running full speed, like, oh, well, Breece Hall's in the first round. So yeah, Breece Hall for me.
Yeah, it's Brees Hall is going to end up with one of two things to happen, most likely this year. It's either going to be like, why are people fading him? Coming off an athletic player, round 2, like injury price, and he ends up as like a top 3 running back this year, and everyone's crazy. Or why did you take Brees Hall in the second round coming off an ACL? Like he clearly wasn't ready. Like there is only one of two scenarios where you're either going to be a genius or you're going to be the biggest idiot on the planet for pushing Brees Hall on
gotta
fantasy.
chase that upside, baby. That's why you gotta go Brees Hall.
Yeah, all day, every day, and twice on Fridays, like I said earlier. But again, there's only one of two scenarios. There's no way that he ends up as like a 15 to 20 running back this year. He's either outside the top 40, struggling with hamstring injuries, or he's a top 3 running back, no in between. But I am on the side of rooting for Brees Hall. I want to be drafting him, and you can call me an idiot after it happens. But we still have 3 questions to cover left. We have the biggest breakout, the biggest bust, and Andrew's 2023 flag plant. So let's start with the breakout. Andrew, who do you think could be the biggest breakout in all of fantasy football for the 2023 season?
Yeah, I know I talked negatively about day 3 picks as running backs entering the season, but I'm going to double down on Tyler Algier for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, this could totally get lit up in flames when the Falcons draft Bijan Robinson, so you can just forego this breakout. You'll know quite ahead of time whether Tyler Algier is going to break out, because I'm just looking at how he did as a rookie. Unlike Dameon Pierce, who was basically kind of handed the job. I mean, there was no competition in Houston. Like, it was Rex Burkhead. It's like, of course he's going to win the job. But Tyler Algier had to beat out Cordell Patterson, who was a veteran and had gotten paid by that organization. And I think he earned his touches a little bit more. He kept the job because he was good, whereas Dameon Pierce kept the job because he was getting volume and they didn't have anyone else to give the ball to. So I thought Algier was better than Dameon Pierce. If you just look at the advanced metrics, Tyler Algier was better than Dameon Pierce was last year. And we've seen Arthur Smith turn his backfield over to one running back that can handle a workload before with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was a 2nd round pick. He wasn't a 1st round pick. So I think that Algier, coming off as PFF's highest graded rookie running back. Look, if you just look at the track record of PFF's highest graded rookie running backs every single year, the vast majority of them, if not all of them, finish as RB1s the following season. And that includes guys that weren't day 1 picks. A lot of them weren't day 1 picks, from Nick Chubb, from Alvin Kamara, from Josh Jacobs, who he was the round 1 pick, Ramondre Stevenson. Like, that's what I was pointing to Ramondre. Like, everyone was like, oh, Damian Harris and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, like, Ramondre Stevenson is better than Damian Harris. Like, draft Ramondre. And what do you know? It worked out. So I'm really trusting in Tyler Algier's talent here. I will be sweating bullets during the draft, but just looking at the way that the Falcons draft picks are set up. Look, if they take Bijan at 8, okay, then this isn't going to work out. But then they don't pick until 44. And there are a lot of teams between 32 and 43 that need running backs. So with everyone just like, oh, well, they'll just draft a running back. A lot of people that say that stuff don't actually look at the actual teams and like where they're actually picking. It's like, oh, well, everyone just has day 2 and day 3 picks to waste on running backs. It's like, no, they don't. And when you draft a guy on day 3, I don't necessarily think that means, oh, well, he's going to take over from Algier. It's like, no, like if Algier was in this class, he would be my top 5 running backs. So I don't really think there's a lot of running backs besides a Bijan that I would just automatically assume would usurp Tyler Algier in that backfield. I really don't think any of them would. Even Charbonnet, I would put Charbonnet behind Tyler Algier. Jahmyr Gibbs is a little bit different. I'd probably put Gibbs ahead, but it's really because of their skill sets are very different. But if it's not Bijan in Atlanta, I'm riding with Tyler Algier.
The fact that you have a different flag plant, that it could have easily just been Tyler Algier would have been a top 5 running back in this year's draft class. He's still just about 2 years removed from being a linebacker. He's not been playing the running back position for a long time. I love me some Tyler Algier, but I also love me some Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who is in this year's draft class for me. I think that I am all in. I think he's going to be the biggest breakout in all of fantasy football. And it ties to a few different things. I mean, for one, I think everyone by now has heard the Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson comments about the fact that JSN was better than both of them. Like just straight up, they both said that they think that he's the best wide receiver of the 3. And a lot of people hear that and they say, okay, well, like they're just pumping up his draft stock now because they're on a team. No, those were comments made before they were drafted, that they still said JSN was better than both of them before they even got drafted to the Saints and the Jets. On top of that, Jaxon Smith-Njigba is one of 2 wide receivers ever to get a 90-plus PFF college grade at 19 years old. And you're the only other wide receiver to ever do that. is Jamar Chase himself. That is a pretty elite class to be in. And of all college wide receivers the last 2 years, only Chris Olave beat man coverage at a higher rate than JSN did. I am all in on him. Every year we see wide receivers that are drafted really highly, that are undervalued in fantasy football. It was Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson last year. It is going to be JSN this year. I am all in on him. But what about the other side of the coin? Before we get into your flag plant, who is the biggest bust, do you think, this year in fantasy football? Not a question that people are going to take kindly. We are welcoming hate to come into our timelines for giving this. But who do you think is the number one player that you think is going to fall flat in fantasy land this year?
Oh, I'm ready for the hate. I'm letting the hate like Star Wars come in here because I don't think I gave enough hate last year. I think that's really what I got to do because of all the players that busted last year, it seemed like there were busts left and right. I need to be calling more players busts. So Dameon Pierce, I know we talked about it already, but I'm kind of with you there. I think that Dameon Pierce is gonna be a bust. There's just a lot of ways where you see a one-dimensional early down grinder back that was only really good because he got volume. He wasn't efficient last year. He had a lot of tackles missed because he got a lot of volume. But what changes in backfields? Touches, workload, volume. And look, Devin Singletary, I don't think they're done adding running backs. Look, when you look at this Texans roster, there's one thing that's super, like, when you just look at their roster up and down on offense, there's one glaring issue. Oh, there's multiple glaring issues, but like from an offensive building standpoint, they don't have speed anywhere. Their offense has zero speed, and Dameon Pierce is not fast. Like, that's not his game. Like, he has to run guys over. So when I look at who the Texans are going to draft with the 34th or 33rd pick, if Jamar Gibbs is on the board, do you think they're going to forego putting Bryce Young's number one receiver last year, basically? They're going to not take him because, we have Dameon Pierce. It's like, no, they're going to draft Gibbs. So I actually put a wager on Gibbs going to the Houston Texans, a nice $5. They're earning $250, hopefully. We'll see how it plays out. But I do think that there's a legitimate chance that they're not done adding to that backfield, especially with a speed element. Maybe it's not Gibbs. Maybe it's Devon Achane. But they just don't have speed on that offense. So Singletary's better than Burkhead and Dare Ogunbowale were last year. So he's going to earn a higher touch volume than those guys ever did. And I just don't think that Pierce did enough as a volume-induced back. Like, that's the thing that changes. Like, just don't chase the volume year over year because that's when it changes the most. Obviously, volume from week to week is more predictable, but from year to year, it can come away very, very quickly. Remember, we were all convinced that week one, Dameon Pierce was going to be the bell cow, and then he wasn't? Like,
yeah.
Things can fall very fast for Pierce, and it's too risky for me to draft him where he's going.
It would break my heart to call him the biggest bust in all of fantasy football like you just did, but I just don't see it playing out another way. You have guys like, I know you don't like him either, but you have guys like Joe Mixon going after him without Samaje Perine there and like two backup running backs behind him, and he's going like a round later than Dameon Pierce in fantasy drafts. That to me is just criminal. For me, it's Deebo Samuel. Like, I know, like, I've loved to hate on Deebo on this podcast. It worked out great one year and it didn't work out so great the other year. But this year, I just don't see a world where Deebo is just going to be all that fantastic when he's going as the wide receiver 16 right now. And that simply is just the pie is not big enough. I mean, like, this is like, what other team like has an other top 20 wide receiver, a top 3 tight end, and a top 3 running back all on the same team before you say the name Deebo Samuel? Like, that is a lot of different weapons to come up with. And you either have a rushing quarterback in Trey Lance, taking over the role to support all 4 of those guys. You have Sam Darnold, who has never supported an elite fantasy offense in his career. Or you have Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy, who started like less than 8 games in his career as the guy that is supposed to elevate 4 different fantasy options this year. Again, they're all phenomenal pieces in their own right. All 4 of those guys are guys that could be a number 1 on an NFL team. But when you have all 4 of them in the same offense and those 3 quarterbacks are going to be the ones leading you, I just think that someone is going to be left to, not produce as much fantasy value. And for me, it's Deebo Samuel. And the reason I'm saying that is because Brandon Ayuk is going over 16 wide receiver spots later. I'm just taking him as the cheaper guy anyway. And I just don't think that it's going to be Deebo Samuel finishing inside the top 12 when he's not seeing the rushing volume anymore with Christian McCaffrey there. And there's just so many other mouths to feed. I just can't see it happening. Do you see it happening with Deebo Samuel? Am I going crazy?
I mean, it's just a matter of like which guys don't get hurt and which guys
Yep.
do. like that's really what you're playing
Yeah.
with here. It's like if Kittle, McCaffrey, Ayuk all get hurt, then Debo's gonna literally go on a tear and make you feel like an idiot. But
Yep.
if it's he that sustains the injury, like he has done more years than not, then you're gonna want to fade Debo. So yeah, I think that there's way more cons than pros in his particular profile, especially when you just kind of bake in where he's being drafted. It's too high for me to take that risk. So yeah, I agree with you on Debo.
Yep. And again, like all these things when we talk about bust today, we don't hate these players. We just hate their value relative to fantasy football. But we have one final question to get to before the podcast is over. Andrew, your 2023 flag plant. Who is or what is your boldest prediction that you believe in for the 2023 season?
All right, let's go. Mr. 0 touchdowns last year. He's hitting double digits this year. Deontay Johnson. He's going to score 10 plus touchdowns this season. I think you can't go wrong drafting Deontay Johnson. It just, at worst, he just is exactly what you drafted him to be. He'll be a wide receiver 3. And at best case, I mean, he can be wide receiver 1. Like, he has all of the peripheral metrics that indicate, oh, wow, he's always open. Oh, wow, he has a high target share. Oh, wow, his quarterback's taking a second-year leap. Like, there are so many things that check off boxes for Deontay to just deliver, and why I really feel confident about taking him in pretty much every single draft. So I think Deontay Johnson's a screaming value. And look, you said it yourself. He's seen like half the end zone targets on his team. So if Kenny Pickett, who was actually really good towards the second half of last year in terms of PFF grading, if he takes a step forward in year 2, which we see a lot of quarterbacks do, well, you're going to be cooking with gas with Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I think that in general, if you look at NFL teams and you say that X player is going to see 40% of the end zone targets, I would say probably a decent amount of those players will end up with 10 touchdowns. Maybe Deontay Johnson does it there. I would hope so, because once again, my drafts would very much appreciate it. But Andrew, it has been a pleasure having you on as the Renaissance man yourself, making time for the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. But you have a lot of great things. You have grown a lot in Twitter followers over the last year, probably more to come this year, as someone that is always doing bigger and better things every single year that we have been friends. But where can the people find you, all your awesome work, and the amazing articles that you've been writing every single week? I've been keeping an eye on almost all of them.
Yep. So all my work can be found over at FantasyPros.com. And new this year, I'm going to be doing a little bit more betting content over on BettingPros.com, which is Fantasy Pros' sister site. So obviously dabbling a little bit more, looking at team totals and spreads. Player props is obviously huge, especially from the fantasy space, because, hey, who knows the players more or better than fantasy football degens? I'll say nobody does. So we have an advantage in the prop market, I believe, and we're going to take advantage of that this year. We'll also obviously drafting tons of teams during the best ball, dynasty trades, all that good stuff. So yeah, go check it out, FantasyPros.com.
Yeah, well, he is at Andrew Erickson _ I am at Alex Caruso. If you were not following already, but don't forget to keep checking out new episodes of the Fresh Fantasy Podcast coming out every Tuesday and Friday. And in the meantime, don't forget to keep chasing that upside. Till next time, everybody.